All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We have Congressman Brandon Gill with us. He's doing a great job. He's currently the youngest member of Congress, newly elected, and new father. He's got a lot of great things going on in his life. He's someone that's been in transition for maybe a while, and God's put him in the position he's in right now for such a time as this. So excited to talk to you, Brandon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Well, we mentioned God, and we have a lot of young people here that are listening that obviously want to do what God has called them to do with their lives, and they are in this season where they're in high school or college, and they want to make a difference. And so we want to ask you first, what inspired you to run for Congress, and how has your faith shaped your journey?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's good to see everybody or to hear from a lot of y'all. And thanks for having me here. I appreciate it. I didn't expect to be running for office anytime soon. So as you mentioned, a new father. We have a little 18-month-old daughter, Marigold. Have another one on the way coming. Danielle's due in mid-May, so we're going to have another baby soon. I was running a conservative media business, was going well, enjoying it, very happy with sort of the way life was going. And we live in Flower Mound right now, so this is just north of Dallas, as most of y'all probably know. And kind of out of nowhere, our current congressman, or then current congressman, Dr. Michael Burgess, announced that he was retiring. He had been there for just over 20 years at the time, had served the district really well, very smart guy, very likable guy. And whenever he announced that, we kind of thought about it and realized there's been a huge problem in the country, and this is not reflective of Dr. Burgess, of conservative districts like Texas 26, where we live, who don't have very conservative congressmen. You see it all the time, a huge mismatch between Washington and the people.
Sure.
And I think that's why Trump got elected in 2016, is because you had the grassroots, the people constantly saying, you guys are not listening to us. The elites in Washington are not listening. And I wanted to make sure that didn't happen in Texas 26. I mean, this is a red district, a conservative Republican district. I wanted to make sure that we had a conservative Republican that represented it in Washington. So ended up jumping into the race, and we can go into more detail. Had a very, very heated, very, very contested primary. 11 of us in the race, a lot of money spent against me. But ended up winning without a runoff, and was able to win the general, and kind of went from there. But it wasn't something that was necessarily on the plate at the time. But when the opportunity came, we realized we have got to get this country back on track, and that starts right here, and that's what caused us to jump in.
Well, that's really helpful. I think being in the right place at the right time and being ready. And Abraham Lincoln said, I'll prepare myself now, because one day my opportunity will come. And, you had a really awesome publication that you ran, and, obviously you were connected to a lot of people through the work that you were doing with that. And you were very involved and instrumental in the documentaries that your father-in-law, we'll talk more about Dinesh later, that was putting together. But, I mean, you've been preparing, in the position that you were in, and then when the right opportunity came, then you seize that opportunity.
Yep. Yeah, you jump on it whenever the opportunity comes, but you can see the state of the country right now, the direction we've been heading, especially for 4 years under Biden and the Democrats. And at some point, you got to realize if it's not me who's going to jump in, who's going to do it?
Right.
If not me, then who? And that's whenever you realize I've got to do this. And I think that was a big part of it.
That's awesome. What role does your faith play in your leadership and decision making?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think of, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but C.S. Lewis wrote, he said, I don't only believe in, he said, I believe in Christianity like I believe in the sun. not only because I see it every day, but because by it I see everything else. And what he means is that our Christian faith is really what illuminates and provides meaning to everything else that we do, everything else in the universe.
Yeah.
Whenever, and it provides a deep fabric of meaning and purpose to what we're doing. And whenever you think about politics in particular, without the faith, there really is no reason to believe one way or the other.
Yeah.
Everything about our legal system, about our political system is normative. It's based on what is right and what is wrong. And without the faith, there is no basis for saying, for differentiating between right and wrong. You ask yourself, why is murder wrong? And an atheist, a materialist cannot honestly answer that. There is no basis without the Christian faith for making that determination. So it provides a lens to look at everything through. And I think that that's how Christian lawmakers and legislatures should look at the world,
Right.
is through a prism of faith. And, you hear a lot of pushback, particularly from the left, of people saying, we want to create a wall of separation between church and state, which is a reference that's oftentimes misattributed. But we want to separate the two, and Christians should separate the two. And you ask yourself, in what other part of life do Christians separate their faith from anything else? You never say, I'm going to separate my faith from my family life. I'm going to draw a wall of separation between my faith and my business life. I mean, that is absurd. And yet we're constantly being told to do that in politics. I think that's absolutely wrong. But it is the faith that inspires us to protect babies who are being slaughtered in the womb, to realize that radical gender ideology is wrong and is poisoning young people, and gives us a framework for understanding not only that it's wrong, but why it's wrong and why we should fight against it. So it's a long way of saying that really is what informs everything about what we're doing.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the separation of church and state. That's misattributed oftentimes. And Thomas Jefferson coined that phrase in a letter to the Danbury Baptist Church. And that was meant to be a one-way wall separating the government's interference in the church from controlling the church, but that didn't mean that Christians shouldn't influence the public sphere.
Right.
And, you strike me as someone who understands that, and we can do the right things sometimes, but people can do the right things not for the right reasons. But as a Christian, it's important to do the right things for the right reasons, and to serve others, to be a servant leader, and to glorify God in that process.
Right.
That's the basis for how we do things. And it's just awesome to hear that you have a Christian worldview and you approach it that way. I mean, we have to be bold, and we have to fight, of course, and that'll mean we clash with people that are on the wrong side of the issues.
Yeah.
But, approaching it from that first standpoint of, I'm here for God, and I'm here to impact people, and you're doing it well.
Yep. Well, appreciate that.
Let's talk about your youth. Being the youngest member of Congress, I got to ask you, how does that feel? What has been the biggest challenge and advantage of being the youngest member of Congress?
Yeah, so I'm the youngest Republican. Democrats have one person who is younger.
Well, let's not talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. They don't matter.
Yeah.
It provides. There are a lot of challenges, especially whenever you're getting started. Whenever I first jumped in the race early on, to over a year ago, and I was the youngest person in the race by quite a bit. I was 29 at the time, and you get a lot of pushback of, well, he's too young, he doesn't have enough experience, he doesn't have X, Y, and Z. And I think that the way to overcome that really is to seek excellence in everything that you're doing.
Yeah.
I think of Paul's letter in 1 Timothy, where he's telling Timothy, don't let anyone look down on you because you were young, but set an example in faith and conduct and in purity. And I think that that's a good template for Christians, which is don't give, for young Christians, I should say, is don't give anybody an excuse to look down on you. seek
Right.
excellence, be an upstanding Christian example for everybody else, and regardless of your age, you can be successful. So it definitely has had some challenges getting started, but we pushed through those, and like we said, we're able to win. But I do think that in Washington, you bring a bit of a different perspective as being the youngest person, and I think of it this way, which is, the America that I experienced is entirely different from the America that most of my peers in Washington experienced. Most of them are late 50s, 60s, 70s, even some in their 80s. I was born in 1994. I'm 30 years old now. And the America I experienced what has been for my entire life since Trump has, other than the period when Trump was in the White House, has been a nation in decline. We've had for my whole life open borders. I mean, we had a border crisis not just under Obama and under Biden. We had a border crisis in the early 2000s under a Republican administration. We have had for my entire life an economy chronically addicted to deficit spending and interest rate manipulation. For my entire life, we've watched as this woke juggernaut has just run over American life and taken over really every single facet of civil society. So that's the America that I experienced, and we live in the greatest country in the world. But whenever that's what you've seen, you have no illusions about how hard we're going to have to fight to get this country back on the right track.
Yeah.
And I think that's the perspective that you bring. I mean, we have no illusions about how bad things are, how bad things can be. I mean, we saw it under the past 4 years of Joe Biden. So I think you do bring a bit of a unique perspective in that standpoint. And I think that people appreciate that. I think whenever you articulate that clearly, they realize it too. So I think that you can add a lot of value being a young person and showing that perspective.
That's great. Follow-up question: how do you navigate leadership in Washington as a young conservative? You kind of touched on this. You talked about excellence in everything you do, and not letting anybody despise you because of your youth, and so that would portray confidence in yourself. But would you expound on that and maybe offer something else?
Yeah, sure. So, I've got a great relationship with leadership in Washington, with Speaker Johnson and Whip Emmer, Majority Leader Scalise, conference leader Lisa McClain, and a lot of it really is showing them that I'm not coming here to be irresponsible. I'm younger than you guys, but I'm not coming here to be not coming here to embarrass you, not coming here to act in a way that is immature. It really is holding yourself to a very, very high standard so that there is no reason, you're so above board, there is no reason for people to go after you for candidly acting like an idiot. And I think that alone will go a really long way at kind of getting over some of any hesitancy that might be there about being youthful or being young. But a lot of it is striving for excellence all the time in everything you do. Don't think of yourself as a young person or as a representative of the youth. Think of yourself as a congressman or somebody involved in politics just like everybody else is. And I think that's a good mindset coming in.
Good. Let's talk about your committees and priorities. What committees do you serve on, and why are they important? So let's just, in layman's term, break it down for the young people that maybe don't know so much about your committees.
Sure. So you're typically on 1 to 2 committees in Washington. They put me on 3, which is either a really, really great idea or a really bad idea. So I'm on the Budget Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and the Oversight Committee.
Yeah.
So the Budget Committee is what sets or should set the top line spending numbers for discretionary spending. It is also the committee that plays a key role in unlocking the reconciliation process, which is a procedural maneuver that we're going through right now to get around the 60-vote threshold in the Senate. It'll be a really key part legislatively of passing the Trump agenda. So that's the first committee. I'll say the other two. Judiciary and Oversight, these are two committees that have subpoena power. So that means in both of them have pretty broad jurisdiction. So I'll take Judiciary. Actually, let's take Oversight, for instance. We have broad jurisdiction over large parts of the federal government. We're supposed to provide oversight over them. And it's chaired by Chairman James Comer. So we can do things like the other week we had a hearing on telework policies under the Biden administration. So we had the power to subpoena Martin O'Malley, who was the former head of the Social Security Administration under Joe Biden. And on the way out the door after President Trump was elected, he massively expanded telework, so allowing career bureaucrats to work from home. They're significantly less effective. They're much more they're very difficult to track. So we can subpoena him, drag him in front of the committee and question him and make him answer for what he's doing. And then you can get a lot of information from that then, if relevant, can be referred to, for instance, the DOJ for prosecutions. So that's going to play a really key role in uncovering a lot of the things that's been going on over the past 4 years in the Biden administration. As part of the Oversight Committee, I'm actually on the DOJ subcommittee.
I saw that.
So we're going to be going after, for instance, the NGOs that have been facilitating open borders over the past 4 years. We're going to have hearings on that very soon.
Good.
And we'll have the ability to drag those people before us and make them answer under oath for what they've been doing. If they lie, they perjured themselves.
Yeah.
And if we're doing our jobs right, I think that we can expose and something that potentially leads to prosecutions. So it's a really important place for providing justice that I think the American people are dying for over what's happened over the past 4 years. So we're going to be going after the NGOs. We're going to be going after a lot of publicly funded media outlets, NPR, PBS, agencies that are being funded by American taxpayers that are just spewing left-wing propaganda nonstop. We're gonna be going after a lot of abuses that we've seen under the Biden administration.
Hopefully save us a lot of money.
Hopefully save us a lot of money as well.
Yeah.
Yep. And Judiciary is similar, where you have a lot of the key investigations over the past 4 years have run through those two committees. So really, really important for providing justice and providing accountability for what Democrats have done to this country.
That's awesome. Well, this is an offshoot of that question. And what are your top priorities in Congress right now?
Yep. So my top priority is border security.
Okay.
I really think that mass migration and illegal immigration is the biggest threat, not only to America, but to all of Western civilization. And as you know, over the past 4 years, Joe Biden opened our southern border very intentionally, let in north of 10 million illegal aliens, including gang members, including members of the Tren de Aragua, murderers, rapists, child pornographers, sex traffickers. I mean, some of the most heinous people from all over the globe, he virtually invited into the country. This undermines not only public safety, but American wages. It strains our healthcare system, our education system, all of the social services that we oftentimes take for granted are strained to the breaking point by open borders. So that's something we've got to go after. And, we've seen a slew of executive orders from the Trump administration, and they've been great.
Yeah.
Bringing back Remain in Mexico, reforming our asylum laws, building the wall, all of these things, which is exactly what we elected President Trump to do. But Congress has got to provide backup to the president as well. So that means we still have the power of the purse. We've got to provide funding for border wall construction. We've got to provide funding for mass deportations, which means more officers at the border, more detention beds, more detention facilities,
Yeah.
providing ICE with the resources that they need. These are all things that Congress has to do. So my biggest priority is making sure that we get them what they need. And then secondly, to take these executive orders the president has issued over the past 10 days since he's been elected, or since he's been inaugurated, and codify those into law.
Right.
So one of the problems is President Trump had all of these or most of these executive orders on the books during his first administration.
Right.
Joe Biden comes in and immediately issues about between 70 and 80 executive orders, basically opening our borders wide open, right? So we've got to codify President Trump's orders into law so that future Democrats don't do the same thing. So to that end, I've got a bill, a Remain in Mexico Act, which does exactly that. It simply takes the 2019 migrant protection protocols and codifies those into law. I've got over 100 co-sponsors, including 2 Democrats. So I'm hoping that we can get that enacted very soon. I think we will before the year is over. But taking what President Trump is doing and making them permanent is my biggest priority, particularly with border security.
It's so important because, as you mentioned, what's done by a pen can be undone.
That's
by a
exactly
pen. So
right.
executive orders
Yep.
need to happen while President Trump is in office, but
Yeah.
only Congress can put legislation on his desk to make it a law.
That's exactly right. And once we're done with border security, I think we need to codify his anti-DEI
Yes.
executive orders into law. Really, almost everything he's doing, I'd like to make permanent.
Right.
And I think that has to be our top priority for Congress.
Totally agree. Okay, we're going to talk about the things that young people can do. So what encouragement would you provide young people? What advice do you have for young people who want to make a difference?
A bit of encouragement I would say is I think that there's a growing recognition not only in the Republican Party, but across the political spectrum, that there are too many, to put it bluntly, there are too many old people running the country right now.
Yeah.
Washington really is a gerontocracy. Democrats can see it too. They saw it, the whole country saw it whenever Joe Biden was cognitively declining while he was president before our very eyes. I mean, the whole country was watching this happen.
Right.
You see it whenever you have senators and congressmen who are in their late 80s, early 90s. I mean, that you can just see something's off here. So I think that there is an appetite for young people to get involved in politics. I think there's a broad recognition that this is needed. There's sort of a changing of the guards that needs to happen. So what that means is there's a lot of opportunity for young people. And what I would say is get involved in any capacity you can. Start off knocking doors for a candidate that you support. Go canvass your local neighborhoods. Get involved in the Texas Youth Summit. Get involved in your Turning Point chapter. Get involved in local political campaigns. Intern for a congressman or a state rep. And work your way up there, but find some place where you can get involved and do it, and you can really make a meaningful difference. I mean, you can have an impact from a pretty early age, and once you start getting involved and you can see how things work, then you can kind of go from there. But my biggest advice is get involved because there is a need for young people right now.
That's very good. I want to take this moment just to remind people that are on this chat to submit their questions for a Q&A session with Congressman Gill at the very end. So we will take your questions. We already have a couple of them that have been submitted, but I'm going to get through a couple of the ones that we outlined, and then we'll get to yours. So follow-up question, as it relates to young people. How can students get involved in politics and influence change? That's a little bit of an offshoot, but is there anything else that they can do that you can think of? I mean, should they be studying policy right now? Should they be, working on their writing or their communication ability? Or what skills in college? I mean, is it the connections that they make? What should they be focusing on outside of formal internships or with organizations? What can they do to better themselves
Yeah.
And where do you ingest your news? Is it X, the trending section? I mean, where do you learn about what's going on?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So I would say in terms of how they can prepare themselves, it's really all of the above. But one thing I would mention is that the left has done a really, really good job of taking over our culture and creating boundaries for political discussion.
Yeah.
Creating boundaries about what is acceptable and not acceptable to say. And it's all largely done via political correctness. So what I would say to young people coming in, make sure that you're being bold in what you're doing and how you're talking about politics. You don't want to be needlessly offensive or anything like that, but we do need to be very clear in the way that we're talking, in the way that we're talking about right and wrong, the way we're espousing our political views. Don't let the left frame the discussion. And if you can get over that hump of maybe a little bit of discomfort as you're kind of going beyond the bounds of that the left created of normal political discussion, you can start to have an impact already, a cultural impact immediately.
Yeah.
But I would say get involved in all the ways that I mentioned earlier, and move the conversation in the right direction.
Yeah.
I'll give you a good example of that, which is if you rewind back to 2015. President Trump is a candidate then. He announces that he's running for president, and nobody at the time was talking about building a border wall.
Yeah.
President Trump mentions it. That was like outside the boundaries of acceptable political discourse at the time. Now, the problem with that was all of the American people really, really wanted a border wall. We were dying for border security. We've had open borders for decades by then. We're sick of allowing illegal aliens to pour across the border. Whenever President Trump started talking about let's build a border wall, he was called racist, xenophobic, every name in the book by Republicans and Democrats, both across the political spectrum. But he had the courage to continue talking about the things that our country needed desperately, and the people were on his side. And you can see how much the conversation has shifted since then. You can't be an elected Republican and be against a border wall right now.
Yeah.
And that is solely, I think, because of President Trump and the courage that he had to continue fighting in the face of pretty strong resistance. I think that's a great example of being bold and fighting against what may be considered, acceptable political discourse.
That's good. Courage begets courage, and when
That's
you have
exactly
courage,
right.
other people will stand up and do what's right sometimes.
Yep.
And I think of this in terms of Ronald Reagan. He was referred to as a happy warrior.
Yep.
And there's a way to fight people and clash with them and disagree with them, but do it civilly and with a smile on your face, and maybe even sometimes offer some jokes.
Right.
And that's how we need to fight people. If we can avoid, ad hominems and calling people names.
Yep.
Not to say that, it isn't funny to see all that, but I mean, President Trump does that so well, but we aren't
But he's
president.
funny.
He's funny.
He's hilarious when he does it.
and he's an outlier, because Trump is an anomaly. I mean, he's someone that is, he's the exception, not the rule. Most of us don't start off when we run for office with 99% name ID, and he's just a beloved hero, to so many in people's television. So I'm just giving you generalities in when you behave this way. And one little anecdote I can offer is when I was at the University of Texas, there were about 200 people in an auditorium, and my communication / political communication professor was talking about media and journalism, and kind of made this broad brush, statement that Republicans don't have black people, and most of the Republicans are racist. Wow. And I challenged him on that assertion, but I did it in front of everybody, and he kind of got a little red in the face. But, I talked to him after the class and built the relationship with him, and he ended up writing me a letter of recommendation to grad school. Okay. Wow. So, there's a way to disagree with people and still, not make it so personal.
Yep.
And so anyway, let's talk about your marriage and family. Why is choosing the right spouse so important? I can imagine politics, putting yourself in the line of fire running for office isn't easy.
Yep.
And you probably need someone who is a little tough and can stick with you when the going gets tough.
That's right. I'll tell you a funny story. Whenever we were in the primary, there were 11 of us. And about 2 or 3 weeks before Election Day, a ton of super PACs from D.C. came in and spent an enormous amount of money attacking me.
Yeah.
Just straight negative against me, not positive or negative related to anybody else, just trying to take me out, saying all kinds of slanderous things, that I was a Chinese agent, an agent of the CCP, that I was going to open our borders and defund the police and turn America into, a lawless, chaotic place. Just flagrant lies. But they had a lot of money behind them. They spent over $2 million doing this. So every single person who voted on Election Day had seen an ad attacking me, either gotten it in the from a text, gotten it in the mail, seen it on TV. They were on broadcast and on cable. I mean, everywhere. And whenever we were in the middle of this, there was a time, especially once these attacks first came in, whenever we really were thinking, this could knock me out. I mean, it was a total bombardment.
Yeah.
And during that process, I remember one night, we were laying in bed, and I looked over at Danielle, and she was on her phone, and I just kind of leaned over to see what she was looking at, and she was watching these attack ads against me. I said, "What are you doing?" And she showed me, and she kind of smiled a little bit. And I said, "Aren't you trying to go to bed?" And she said, "No, I'm loving this." She watches this stuff for fun.
Yeah.
And so she is in it for the fight, 100%.
Yeah.
She loves the fight, extremely supportive. And you need that whenever things are coming at you hard. You really do. So, even away from politics, putting that aside, who you marry is somebody you spend you spend more time with your wife, or if you're a lady, your husband, than anybody else. So they can make your life incredible or can make your life miserable. I mean, other than accepting Christ, there is no more important decision you can make than who you marry.
Yeah.
That is going to, these are the people who are going to raise your kids, who are going to support you, that you're going to support. You really do become one flesh. So that's, there is no more important decision you'll make outside, again, of accepting Christ. And Danielle has been great. She's been extremely supportive of everything. She's been a great mother to Marigold, who's now 18 months old. And like I said, we've got another baby on the way.
Yeah.
So it's been a great ride.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. Well, any advice, practically speaking, to pick the right person? And
yeah, I mean, there's nothing more important than making sure you have a shared faith.
Yeah. And
with that comes a shared worldview.
Yeah.
But if you have, if you have the basics right, which is you both share a strong faith in Christ and belief in God, and from that should give you a shared moral and political worldview. It should.
Right.
Then everything else is almost superfluous. There are lots of things about what you prefer in people and what you don't, but those two things are the most important parts of a marriage.
Yeah.
Every other things can change. They can be different, but those things have to be aligned. And that would be my biggest advice for young people.
That's great. How has marriage and fatherhood shaped your perspective in leadership?
Yeah. Whenever you have a child, you realize that you have a tangible stake in the country's future.
That's good.
So whenever I think of more abstract political problems that we deal with, like the national debt and our deficit. We're running $2 trillion deficits every year right now. That matters to me, not only because I love the country and I want to see the country succeed and I want to see us be strong on the world stage and have a strong economy for everybody else, but most importantly because I know that this is the debt that my daughter is going to inherit.
Yeah.
This is the money that she's going to be taxed to pay off. This is the debt that is going to or could really reduce America's strength on the world stage, which is going to impact Marigold in an untold number of ways. And I'm just using that as an example. But you have a stake in the country's future that you can look at every single day. Say, I'm fighting for Marigold, and that's a very real sentiment. That's a very real motivating factor that I think totally changes the way you look at politics, and what we're actually fighting for and why.
I'm sure it wasn't just Trump's endorsement that helped you on that campaign trail. I saw many pictures you had with Marigold. That probably won you a few votes. You didn't have to kiss anybody else's baby. You had a beautiful baby yourself, and you were sharing her proudly.
There's nothing. There's no more dirty politics than bringing a baby to a grassroots event. I always joke that nobody voted for me; they voted for Marigold.
That's so true.
And we brought her all the time. She loved it. You know, She was a little baby. I think she was 4 months old whenever we first started, and we brought her to almost everything, and she loves people. She smiles the whole time. I had one time whenever we were. I was giving a talk and I was having to hold Marigold while I was talking because we were traveling and Marigold puked all over Danielle on the plane is why I was doing that. And she had to go shower afterwards. But I was holding Marigold and I'd say a few jokes. And Marigold at the time, probably 6 months old, she just seemed to intuitively know every time I said a joke to smile really big, laugh, and start clapping. And it was the cutest thing in the world. So we've had a great time with Marigold, having her on the campaign trail. And
that's awesome.
It really is what people vote for, not me.
Well, we mentioned President Trump and America's future. My God, he's the greatest president of our lifetime. I mean, he was so close to death, maybe a millimeter away, and God spared him, not just for his sake, but for our nation's sake. I shudder to think of what could have happened had that bullet hit him at the right way, and it hit him, but it didn't hit him in a way that killed him, and thank God. He's saved his life for such a time as this. What do you admire most about President Trump, and what can young conservatives learn from him?
Yeah. What I admire most about Trump is his courage. We talked a little bit about it earlier. In shifting the framework of the debate on immigration. But, in both the biblical and the classical traditions, courage was always the number one virtue. And it's because without it, you don't have any of the others. It's really the virtue that unlocks all the others. You can have great intentions and great moral values and views and everything, but if you don't have the courage to carry them out whenever times get really tough, it doesn't really matter. And Trump showed that. He was able to persevere through an insane amount of stuff in his 2016 elections, and of course between 2020 and 2024, whenever he had at times the entire world, it seemed like, against him. He was able to continue charging. And I really do think that God saved him from that assassination attempt to be president, to get this country back on track. But the amount of perseverance and courage that he's shown is really, really incredible and really inspiring.
I mean, they went after his businesses. The 2 impeachments. They raided Mar-a-Lago. There were 2 assassination attempts on his life. The witch hunt trials that were on bogus charges.
Just incessantly slandered in the media.
Oh my gosh!
All the time.
He lost his net worth. At least a fraction of it. Being president where everyone else made money.
Right.
And President Trump, the amount of perseverance and toughness and fortitude to push through, I think it's unparalleled. I don't think really anyone has ever gone through what he's gone through, and it's the greatest comeback in American politics, in the history of politics. It's incredible. Okay, more broadly, what do you see as the biggest challenge and opportunity for America's future?
I think that after this election cycle, Republicans have control of the House. We have a majority in the Senate, not a supermajority, not the 60 votes, but we have a majority.
Yeah.
We have the presidency. We talk about a mandate all the time, but the American people really did give us a clear, direct mandate to get this country back on track. There was a poll from Quinnipiac earlier this week, and it was showing the favorable and unfavorable ratings of Republicans and Democrats. The Republican Party, and the Democrat Party. Republicans were underwater, meaning there were 2 percentage points more of people who viewed the Republicans unfavorably versus favorably. Democrats were underwater by, I believe, 26 points.
Wow.
That is almost unheard of. This is a political party that has run themselves into the ground. And really, it's because what we're seeing now with the crazy wokeness and the weirdness, all of that is just the logical progression of their own ideology. You know, a worldview that has no moral bounds at all, that doesn't believe in absolute truth, that by necessity has to embrace the idea that, you know, a boy can become a girl and a girl can become a boy, and boys should be in girls' sports and men should be in girls' locker rooms. You know, their ideology requires them to embrace these insane ideas.
Yeah.
And the American people just flat out, I think, had enough with it.
Right.
You know, they said, we've gone so far down the slippery slope, I don't want any more to do with you guys. So their implosion creates a huge opportunity for Republicans and for conservatives to get the country back on track and to do it aggressively. And President Trump is doing that right now. You know, people were sick of open borders. We are now finally deporting large numbers of people who shouldn't be in this country at all. We're finally deporting them.
Right.
We're finally militarizing the border, which the American people have been begging for decades now. We're actually doing it. You know, President Trump has issued executive orders clearing DEI out of hiring practices in the federal government. And you're seeing the private sector start to follow. You're seeing, you know, Facebook now believes that there are only 2 genders. The tech world is getting behind President Trump. So we're seeing this massive cultural shift in our direction. And I think it creates an opportunity for us to just put our heads down and keep charging, because we are winning. We are the cool people now. The culture has shifted massively over the past 4 years, and we've got to just put the pedal to the floor and keep going.
That's so good. And I think Democrats really have an identity crisis.
Yep.
I mean, they don't know who the leader of their party is, and they've gone so far left, as Bill Maher talks about, that they don't really know how to reach people in the middle anymore. And that's good for us. We just got to keep our heads down as conservatives and Republicans and reaching people and adding to our numbers. So it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out. But the reality is, you guys pretty much have about a year before people start worrying about their reelects. And, you know, a lot of this stuff has to be done this year in 2025 because 2026 will be tied up with election stuff. So
unfortunately, that's true.
So President Trump recognizes this, and, you know, while they're trying to figure out who they are, Democrats, I mean, you know, he's punching them in the mouth day after day with all these executive orders, and he's moving so quick. It's like a shock and awe strategy.
Right.
And they're just getting no break from his desire to change and affect the country in a positive way. So it's awesome to watch.
And it's refreshing too. I mean, it's refreshing to see a president do exactly what he said he was going to do. And do it immediately. There were reports that early on in his presidency, one of President Trump's advisors went up to him and they said, "Mr. President, we should space out these executive orders. You know, don't sign 100 or 200 on the first day, and let's kind of space it out a little bit." And President Trump, in very direct terms, said, "Absolutely not. We're saving the country now," and he's been going nonstop since then. So it is really neat and very refreshing to see.
That's great. He's in a hurry to save America.
He is. Yep.
That's good. Well, let's talk a little bit about Dinesh D'Souza. I've gotten to know him and been very blessed. I actually knew your father-in-law and Debbie before I got to meet you. But just wonderful people.
Yep.
Dinesh, of course, produces these amazing documentaries. He's been around since, I guess he's really come onto the scene, in the national landscape, I think, with his first movie. Was it Obama's America?
Yeah, Obama's America was his big first documentary, which came out, I believe, in 2012 or around then. But he's been in the political world for a while. He was a policy advisor for Reagan in the 80s, had written several books, some of them being kind of keystone conservative books. But once he pivoted into the documentary world, he had his first one that did very, very well, and then Obama went after him for it, and kind of went from there.
Yeah, yeah. So how has your father-in-law, Dinesh, influenced your views and leadership?
Yeah, he's kind of a political mentor of mine. Just an exceptionally intelligent person.
Yeah.
So I talked to him a lot about politics and strategy. But one of the most inspiring things about him, I think, is he really did have the world against him for a little while whenever the Obama administration was going after him.
Yeah.
So I think for anybody who doesn't know, he was sent to a confinement center for, I believe, 9 or 10 months for a wildly trumped up charge related to campaign finance laws. And whenever he was doing that, this is, by the way, this was happening whenever I first met Danielle and was, getting to know her. He was sleeping in a confinement center, not with white collar criminals as you would normally expect, but with murderers and rapists and people who had done some really heinous things. Not a safe place to be. And this was happening in 2012, 13, 14 at a time whenever I don't think even most conservatives were fully aware of the extent of the weaponization of the federal government. That really started in an extreme degree under Obama, and Dinesh was one of the first people to bear the brunt of that. So it was a different world. If that happened now, every conservative would immediately know what's going on. They would say, this is clear persecution. You're clearly being targeted for political reasons. That wasn't quite the case at the time. Mm-hmm. I think people who were paying attention realized it, but it wasn't as mainstream of a concept at the time. So he had... he dealt with that in a way. He dealt with that before it was cool. I mean, he was a political prisoner before it was cool. So, but to push through that and to come out of it, not worried about the federal government, but just to say, I've been through hell, and my response is going to be to just swing back 10 times harder. And that's what he did. Never slowed down for a second. All it did was motivate him to fight back against the left who are running our country into the ground and taking over our federal government and fundamentally transforming our country. And I found that really inspiring.
Yeah. What happened to him, really could happen to all of us. And I think that's indicative in one of his later documentaries, Police State, which we both got to be a part of. And, I got to be the pastor in the film where I got arrested just for expressing my views, and and you were an actor in that as well, so pretty neat. But what happened to Dinesh really could happen, and it's a futuristic scene, but it could happen to anyone and everyone, and it's so important that we fight for freedom because, as Ronald Reagan said, freedom is only one generation away from extinction.
That's right.
You got to fight for it. Okay. Final words on my end. Let's just pick one of these. There's 2 questions I could pick from. What's one action young people could take right now to make an impact?
Yeah, I would say, we talked a lot about the momentum that's behind our movement, the conservative movement, the Republican Party. I would say get involved in any capacity you can. Your local, your college Republicans, your Turning Point, your Texas Youth Summit, your local congressman, your state reps, anything you can, and just put the pedal to the floor and keep pushing. Because we've got huge opportunity, and there's a lot of opportunity, like I said, for young people. So get involved and get in the fight.
That's good. Well, now we're going to take a couple of audience questions, and
Right.
in no particular order. I'm going to go with Vasant from Houston. What are your thoughts on the ongoing Hindu and Christian programs in Bangladesh? The Democrats' reckless foreign policy and globalist agenda have clearly contributed to this instability, just as they have in the Middle East. How do you think Trump and his administration plans to address and rectify these issues? That's an interesting question.
Yeah. So President Trump had basically inherited a world that was on fire.
Yeah.
Not just domestically in the U.S. with open borders and with wokeness going crazy, but we talk about it a lot. But the invasion of Ukraine wouldn't have happened under President Trump.
Yeah.
October 7th wouldn't have happened under President Trump. So many of the geopolitical conflagrations that we've seen over the past 4 years are there because the Democrats have, I think, intentionally exuded weakness on the world stage. And that has got to be our starting point whenever thinking about issues like this, which is we've got to get our military back on track. We've got to get our economy back on track. That soft economic power goes a long ways across the globe. Having a military that's focused on killing our enemies and not focused on, weird left-wing social programs and transgender troops and, busing people across state lines to get abortions. That weakens our military and makes the world less safe. So we've got to start there. And then once we get our country back on track, I think a lot of problems across the world start to solve themselves.
That's awesome. Thank you. Well, Vasant is one of our leaders and interns, and he's also got a group, Hindus for Trump. So
there we go.
Great
Good.
guy. All right, let's do Judah from Justin. What is the likelihood of reducing the federal debt during the current Congress? And if that cannot be achieved during this Congress, how much can the growth of the debt be reduced during the current Congress?
That is a great question from Judah, and I think that this is my friend Judah from the district. So good to hear from you, Judah. That's something that I'm certainly fighting for right now with this reconciliation process, and without getting too much into the weeds for how it works is we've got to extend the Trump tax cuts. We have got to reform mandatory spending, though, that accompanies that. We're running a $2 trillion deficit right now every single year. We've got a $36 trillion debt. If we don't do something now, there really is it's hard to imagine there being any end in sight. So we have got to fight for mandatory spending reform and pro-growth economic policies, lowering taxes and massive deregulation. Both of those are things that President Trump has talked about, he campaigned on, is very serious, and so are Republicans in Congress. The path out of this is going to be reducing the deficit and then growing the economy, growing our way out of the debt. We're at a point now, just for anybody who doesn't realize, we spent more last fiscal year on interest on our debt than we did on military spending. This is an existential crisis for the country, and it's to the point now where our debt is starting to crowd out private investment. You've seen that with interest rates going up. We cannot continue to borrow at the same rate that we have been, because we will not experience the same level of economic growth and prosperity that we have over the past several decades. We can't. We've sort of we're hitting a breaking point right now. So that's got to be a top priority for Republicans.
Well, you guys are off to a good start, and with your Doge committee, maybe that'll help
that's exactly
in some ways.
Right.
Okay, I got another question. Daniel from Houston. This sounds like a very specific question that relates a lot to Daniel. What is the best way for a graduate student such as myself to land a full-time congressional job or internship by the summer with a committee member like yourself? I am based in Washington, D.C., now at the University out of the University of Houston. That's hint, hint. So
There we go. I like it.
he's shooting his shot.
Yep, I like the specificity.
Yeah.
So I would say reach out to your congressional office and reach out to several congressional offices and start applying. Really
Not if he's a rhino, though. Don't do that.
Wait, who is that?
I said not if he's a rhino.
Yeah, don't apply. Don't apply for a Democrat office. But find your congressman and other congressmen in the area and just start applying. People there are always congressmen who are looking for either interns or for more people in their office.
That's great. Yeah, not a Democrat, and Brandon's definitely not a rhino. So, all right. Okay, Noah from Montgomery. Why is it essential for youth to be involved in the political realm during this time in history? That's an interesting question. This time during history.
Yeah, in this time in history. I think one of the reasons, and we talked about it earlier, is that there's not only a little bit different of a political perspective that you bring, which I referenced earlier, but a lot of young Republicans are more conservative than the older generation. Yeah. They can see the problems that we've been dealing with. They can see the effects of mass migration much more clearly than our parents and grandparents can. It's just a reality that I've noticed over the past several years. They're the ones, we're the ones who are going to be dealing with the impact of our federal debt and as well as our children. So we have a little bit more of a clear-headed understanding of where the country is, and that is something we desperately need right now. And there will be a bit of a changing of the guard. So now it provides a good window for young people to get involved as well.
Yeah. Well, I think of it from a young person's perspective. I mean, you and I, we were probably shaped by September 11th.
Yeah.
Growing up during that time, and young people today, I imagine, you're in high school and you're having to do Zoom calls instead of be with your classmates because of the COVID lockdowns, right. Ridiculousness there, and then you have the BLM riots all across the country.
Yep.
And just media pushing the division, and you're the guy running for president almost gets shot. I mean, that
right.
hasn't happened since Reagan, and before that JFK. So it must seem like a very dark time to young people.
Yep.
But I think of it this way, that God has put us in this time for such a time as this, and it's maybe not the most ideal time, compared to nicer times for kids that grew up in the 90s where it seemed more peaceful.
Right.
But he's put us in this time because we can handle it, and we're to be change agents.
Yep, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And you mentioned a lot of the things you dealt with. We also experienced October 7th and everything that came out of that, and the effect of America being extraordinarily weak on the world stage.
Yeah.
And then we saw the backlash in the U.S. where we saw massive pro-Hamas protests all over the country. And you realize, who are these people and why are they in my country? Why have we allowed people who support foreign terrorist organizations to have any influence in our country at all? Why do we allow them in our country to begin with? So I think that you have a little bit more of a realistic picture of how dire things are, and how much we're going to have to fight.
Yeah, and some of them maybe came across the southern border. Yeah. But some of them are here on visas, and thank God Trump's talking about revoking their visas for this sake. All right, one more question. This one's a little bit redundant. They're looking for an internship. Let's see. Do you have any tips for young people trying to get in the military or government career in the future? This is from Duke. And another question is another question. I have been, Chaz and Hutto has been applying for congressional internships for the past 2.5 years, and I have gotten some interviews, but I'm continuously getting overlooked. While not to sound egotistical, I've seen some with lower qualifications than me get some of those internships. What advice do you have for my situation? That's
that's a great question, and I would say keep charging and keep applying, but also figure out how to sort of work your way into the system. So Don't just send an email with your resume or with your application. Call up the office. Try to get to know people who work in the office that you're applying for. If you can visit it, do that. Meet the person who sits at the front desk. Fight to sort of work your way into these circles as much as possible to make sure that you're getting considered on an equal basis with everybody else. But I would say just keep charging and make yourself relevant to the discussion.
Yeah, and only thing I'd add to that is I've never gotten a job by sending a resume into some black portal somewhere.
That's right.
It's always because you have a connection, because you've met somebody. I started out with 0 connections in politics, and everything that I've been blessed with is by the favor of other people. It's God's favor flowing through those people, but you got to meet people.
Yep, but you can make those connections. You don't have to have any kind of special avenue or anything. You can build those connections yourself.
And hard work and not giving up, as you mentioned, I think eventually that pays off.
Yep.
Okay, well, it's such an honor to have had you here. Thank you for your time, and
appreciate it.
Keep up the good work. We're going to be praying for you, Brandon.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We're fighting hard, so thanks for having me.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for tuning in to our Texas Youth Summit meetup. We're going to continue to do these monthly, so make sure you tune in next month. We're going to continue to have great guests for you to learn from and ask questions. We're producing content that we know that you'll enjoy. So make sure you subscribe on our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, X, and our email list. And that way you can stay in touch with us and get the content. If you're a young person, make sure you tune in live and be a part of what we're doing. It's a great thing, and we know you'll be benefited from it. Thank you so much.